Okay, let's dive right in. We're looking at the just the sheer intensity of Russia's aerial campaign against Ukraine this past week. It's been called, I think, the most massive airstrike since this war began over 3 years ago, which is saying something. So our mission today is really to sift through the latest reports, the sources we've gathered, and pull out the most important insights for you, our listener. We want to help everyone understand this escalation in the air war, what it means strategically, and maybe most importantly, the profound human cost.
Yeah, the numbers from the specific attack, June 29th, 2025, they're just staggering. Russia threw 537 aerial weapons. That's the total number in just one overnight assault.
537, that's huge.
It is, and it breaks down to 477 drones and decoys, plus another 60 missiles. Now, Ukraine's defenses, they were incredibly busy. They managed to shoot down 249 of those.
Which is a significant number in itself.
Absolutely. But, and this is a key point from the sources, 226 were essentially lost or neutralized, and it seems likely that was due to Russian electronic jamming. Right. Electronic warfare is a major factor here. It disrupts guidance, makes interceptions harder. It's a constant battle of measures and countermeasures.
And what really stands out is how widespread this attack was. It wasn't just the front lines. No, this went deep into Ukraine. Regions way out west, like Lviv, an industrial site there, caught fire. Power was cut.
Far from the main fighting.
Exactly. We also saw hits in Mykolaiv, Zaporizhzhia, Kremenchuk, Khmelnytskyi Oblast. Lutsk, apparently, had its biggest strike since the full-scale invasion started. Then Sumy, Poltava, Chernihiv, 2 people found dead in industrial rubble in Chernihiv. Tragic.
And Kyiv.
Kyiv, too. Explosions, falling debris hitting residential buildings, infrastructure damage. It messed with the metro system. 3 people killed there, 23 injured, and that included, believe it or not, 14 emergency responders and a child.
Targeting the responders again? It's a pattern.
The immediate human cost is just awful. Beyond Kyiv, 1 person killed by a drone in Kherson. Another died when a drone hit their car in Kharkiv. 6 wounded in Cherkasy, 1 of them a child. And, a really somber note amidst all this, the loss of a Ukrainian F-16 pilot, Maxim Ustimenko, born in '93.
Very young.
Yeah. He reportedly shot down 7 targets himself before his F-16, one of the Western-supplied ones, crashed after being damaged.
A huge loss, both personally and strategically.
Definitely. And the scale of this whole thing, this single night, it was enough that Poland and other allies actually scrambled their own jets just to be safe.
That tells you the level of perceived threat even beyond Ukraine's borders. And, what's immediately clear from this, and the sources really hammer this home, is that this isn't some random spike. It feels like a very stark signal of an accelerating, almost more brazen bombing campaign.
Right.
And this level of escalation, well, frankly, it just pushes any real hope for peace talks further away, doesn't it? Despite some recent offers floating around.
It seems to.
President Zelensky summed it up starkly. He mentioned that in just 1 week, Ukraine faced over 114 missiles, more than 12,270 drones, and almost 1,110 guided air bombs.
That kind of volume is hard to even comprehend.
Exactly. It tells you everything about the relentless pressure Ukraine is constantly under.
So, okay, stepping back from that single horrific night, what does this constant threat from the air mean for the people on the ground? For their daily lives, their infrastructure? What patterns are emerging?
Well, if we look at the bigger picture, the data is pretty grim. April 2025, for instance, was the deadliest month for civilians in Ukraine since way back in September 2024. We're talking 209 killed, 1,146 injured in just that 1 month.
And where were these casualties happening? Near the front?
That's the crucial point, no. A staggering 97% of those casualties happened in territory controlled by Ukraine.
97%.
Yeah. So this isn't just battlefield spillover. It looks like a deliberate strategy, as the sources suggest, aimed at terrorizing civilians, exhausting them, trying to break their will far from the actual fighting lines. And the trend is worrying. 2024, the 3rd year of the full invasion, saw a record spike in this kind of civilian targeting. Over 1,600 civilian deaths just from remote attacks, missiles, drones, bombs. That's a 16% jump from 2023.
And the number of attacks themselves?
More than tripled in 2024. Air and drone attacks, it's just constant. And there's this deeply disturbing pattern of hitting civilian infrastructure, just indiscriminately, it seems. Between the start of the full-scale invasion in Feb 2022 and the end of 2024, the data shows over 5,500 specific incidents damaging civilian infrastructure.
500.
And get this, over 3/4 of those, more than 4,200 incidents, hit residential buildings, homes. In 2024 alone, damage was recorded in 24 out of Ukraine's 27 regions. It's everywhere.
It's not just homes, though, is it?
No, far from it. Over 650 schools and other educational places, over 350 medical facilities. We all remember the reports from July 2024, the destruction of Okhmytskyi, Kyiv's main children's hospital. Just horrific.
And the tactics you mentioned earlier, these particularly cruel methods.
Absolutely. That needs highlighting. The sources document these deliberate tactics that are just chilling. There's the double tap method you brought up, hitting a location, waiting for rescuers to arrive, and then hitting the exact same spot again.
To target the rescuers.
Precisely. It's a blatant violation of international humanitarian law designed purely to maximize casualties among people trying to save lives.
Unbelievable.
And then there are reports, documented incidents, of drones specifically hunting ambulances. Over 10 times in 2024, mostly in Ukrainian-controlled parts of Kherson.
Hunting ambulance.
It's a tactic seemingly designed to just amplify fear and completely overwhelm the emergency services. So this really raises a critical question, and it's a serious one. Why is Russia systematically attacking Ukraine's energy grid? Because that is unequivocally a violation of international humanitarian law.
Right, it's protected infrastructure.
It is, and the strategy shifted. Since late March 2024, the focus moved from just hitting transmission lines to hitting the actual generation facilities, power plants.
Taking out the source.
Exactly. And the impact has been severe. By September 2024, estimates showed Ukraine had lost something like 80% of its thermal power capacity.
80%.
80. And roughly half of its total electricity generation capacity overall.
Which must mean blackouts.
Constant rolling blackouts, widespread, affecting over 1 million people directly, impacting more than 75% of businesses. Think about Kyiv residents there spent almost 100 days, a third of the year in 2024, without electricity for significant periods.
Living like that must be incredibly difficult.
It's immense pressure. And looking at these patterns, the sources suggest Russia's motivation seems pretty clear: to strong-arm Ukraine into surrendering. By making life unbearable for civilians, disregarding the laws of war entirely, and creating just massive long-term recovery problems.
Okay, so faced with these relentless attacks, this devastating impact, what does the strategic picture look like, especially in the air? Air power feels absolutely central here.
It is. And what's fascinating, there's a policy paper from the Mitchell Institute that really lays this out. It calls air superiority an absolute necessity to achieve a decisive advantage.
Meaning, without controlling the skies.
Without it, the war just grinds down. It becomes something like World War I trench warfare, static and bloody. And in that kind of fight, the side with more people, more equipment, which, let's be honest, is currently Russia by sheer numbers, likely prevails in the long run.
So where are we now? Does anyone have air superiority?
Right now, it seems we're in a state of air parity. Basically, neither side controls the skies.
Why is that?
Primarily because air defenses on both sides are just incredibly lethal. It's too dangerous for either air force to operate freely over enemy territory.
But parity sounds almost even. Yet you mentioned Russia's advantages. So is Ukraine fighting with, I don't know, one hand tied behind its back?
Well, in many ways, yes. Russia definitely has significant advantages on paper. More combat aircraft, better quality aircraft in some cases, long-range missiles, and very effective electronic warfare, as we discussed.
Jamming.
Exactly. And critically, there's this concept of a relative sanctuary because of certain restrictions, reportedly from the U.S., on how Ukraine can use provided long-range weapons. Russia can launch attacks from bases or positions deep within its own territory that Ukraine can't effectively strike back at.
So they can hit Ukraine with relative impunity from those locations.
That's the implication. It's a major strategic challenge for Ukraine. On Ukraine's side, they naturally started with a smaller air force. They're often forced to fly really low to try and avoid Russia's advanced surface-to-air missiles and fighters.
Dangerous flying.
Extremely. And now, as these Western fighters, the F-16s, the Mirage 2000 start arriving, there's a whole new challenge. Ukraine needs to rapidly evolve its command and control systems to integrate these jets safely. The big fear is fratricide.
Friendly fire.
Exactly. Friendly air defenses accidentally shooting down friendly aircraft. It's a tragic risk when you're trying to merge complex new systems into a hot war zone under extreme pressure.
And drones. We hear so much about them. They seem to be everywhere in this conflict.
Right.
How do they fit into this air power equation?
Oh, they're absolutely critical. Indispensable, really, for both sides, but in different ways. Ukraine has this incredibly ambitious goal to build 1 million small drones in 2024.
A million.
A million, that works out to something like 3,000 a day. They're using 3D printing commercial parts. It makes them cheap. And these small drones often have built-in cameras, giving them ISR capabilities, intelligence, surveillance, reconnaissance. Cheap, disposable eyes in the sky for battlefield awareness.
And Russia's drones.
Russia makes heavy use of those Iranian-designed Shahed drones, which they call Zherin 2. They're loitering munitions, basically slow-moving cruise missiles or explosive drones that can circle before hitting. Russia often sends them in waves, sometimes mixed with faster missiles, to try and overwhelm Ukrainian air defenses.
Saturation attacks.
Precisely. But Ukraine isn't just defending, they're also developing and using their own long-range attack drones now. Sources mention ranges up to 1,500 kilometers, and even talk of a new variant possibly reaching 300 kilometers, hitting targets deep inside Russia.
So that Mitchell Institute paper you mentioned, what was its core recommendation strategically?
It was very direct. The paper argues that the restrictions preventing Ukraine from using provided weapons against Russian forces on Russian territory that pose a direct threat. Those restrictions need to be removed. The argument is purely strategic from their perspective. They say that if Ukraine is to have a realistic chance to defend itself, its territory, its freedom, against a much larger, better equipped aggressor, then removing those restrictions is a military necessity. It's about allowing Ukraine to be more effective in its own defense.
Okay, so you have this immense military pressure, the strategic challenges, the constant bombardment. How does a country, how do people actually endure this day in, day out? This is where that story of Ukrainian resilience becomes so central, isn't it? It's not just strategy, it's human spirit, adaptation.
It really is. The war, for many Ukrainians, has become this brutal, exhausting routine. It's hard to imagine. We hear these stories, like from a Ukrainian journalist, Alina Hutz, who's now volunteering in a war hospital. She talks about how basic everyday necessities have been stripped away, just gone.
Simple things we take for granted.
Exactly. And she shared something really striking. Her family, her neighbors, they don't even go to the air raid shelters anymore during attacks. They just sleep in the hallways of their apartment buildings.
Why? Is it safer there?
It's perceived as marginally safer than being in a room with windows, but her point was, she said, it's terrifying that we are used to it, that we have adapted.
Just normalize the horror.
That's what it sounds like, an adaptation born of sheer exhaustion and frequency. It makes you pause and think, what does normal even mean when your hallway is your bomb shelter or your kid's classroom is underground? And that adaptation goes hand in hand with this incredible sense of self-reliance. Hutz also said, you need to be your own hope.
Wow.
Yeah. It's a powerful statement, especially when, promised international aid can be slow or get tangled up or conditions change. Promises aren't always kept on time.
So they rely on themselves, on each other.
Absolutely. You see it everywhere. These amazing volunteer networks distributing food, medicine, supplies, communities setting up underground classrooms so kids can keep learning, somehow find some safety. But, we shouldn't romanticize it. There's clearly an immense societal strain. People's lives are on hold. Home renovations started before the war, just stalled. Businesses are struggling massively with the power cuts, the uncertainty. And there's this constant financial burden. People are always fundraising for drones, for body armor, for medical supplies, often for their own relatives fighting on the front lines.
That must be exhausting, too.
Terribly. And there's frustration. A poet and soldier, Artur Drone, he put it very pointedly. He said, abroad, the saturation of information about the war is becoming less and less, but in our country, the war is a daily reality. Nothing has ended, people die, all the same.
A sense that the world is moving on while they're still living it every single day.
Exactly. That feeling of waning global attention must be incredibly difficult when the bombs are still falling. And sometimes that reality forces really tough decisions. Like President Zelensky recently withdrawing Ukraine from the Ottawa Convention, the treaty banning anti-personnel landmines.
That sounds controversial. Why?
Well, a Ukrainian lawmaker, Roman Kostenko, called it a step that the reality of war has long demanded. His point, and presumably the government's, is that Russia isn't party to that treaty and uses mines extensively against Ukrainians. So Ukraine felt it had to reserve the right to use them defensively for its own survival. It's a pragmatic, if grim, choice forced by the situation.
Difficult choices in impossible circumstances.
Absolutely. But even amidst all this darkness, you see these little glimmers of attempted normalcy, like McDonald's planning to open 10 new restaurants in Ukraine in 2025. That'll bring their total almost back to what it was before the war.
It sounds small, but maybe it's symbolic.
Perhaps. It speaks to this incredible determination to just keep going, to maintain some threads of ordinary civilian life, even under siege.
So let's try and wrap this up. What does it all mean? We've looked at the staggering scale of Russia's air attacks, the terrible cost for civilians, the damaged infrastructure. We've touched on the strategic chess game in the air, Ukraine's challenges, but also this incredible, almost stubborn resilience and adaptation of the Ukrainian people.
Yeah, if we connect the dots, Russia's strategy seems pretty clear from the sources. Use overwhelming aerial bombardment to try and bomb Ukraine into submission, drain their resources, break civilian morale, break their national will. That appears to be the goal. So the final thought, the question maybe for you, the listener, to ponder is this. In a war where civilians are paying such an unbearable price, where international law seems frequently ignored, and where crucial external support can waver or face aid skepticism, how does a nation actually sustain its fight for sovereignty? And maybe even more profoundly, what does hope truly look like day to day on those front lines and in those shattered cities when just adapting to terror becomes a way of life?